All right, I think we could probably get started. We got a few more folks who might be trickling in, but thanks everybody for being here. Tonight we're talking about just kind of the logistics and the different processes for harvesting and selling and turning in produce for different Big River Farmers markets. Primarily focused on CSA and the local Food for Every Table program, which is our new food self-purchasing program. That some other folks at the food group are helping us out with logistics and delivery. So I'm going to share my screen and get us started with kind of the weekly produce sourcing process for those various markets. Again, primarily focused on CSA and the new food self-purchasing program. So give me 1 second here. Okay, so this is just kind of a basic rundown of what this produce sourcing or purchasing process or sales process from your perspective as a farmer might look like for those kind of markets that we manage. I guess I should start by saying, just reiterating that, you know, as Big River Farms in the food group, we run 3 kind of main markets or sales opportunities for you all as farmers in the program. So the main ones are the CSA, our Community Supportive Agriculture Program, which most of you have contracts for already. And if you don't, if you're a first-year farmer, we're kind of in the process still of creating those, so stay tuned. But that's our main primary market that we manage and operate at Big River Farms and source food from you as farmers as part of that on a weekly basis from mid-June to mid-October each year. The second one is, like I mentioned, our new local Food for Every Table program, or LFET, abbreviated. It's a food self-purchasing program. So it's basically another market opportunity, a supplemental market opportunity for you as a farmer. If you have weekly produce that you're either not selling to our CSA or that you don't have a sales outlet for independently, whether that's your own CSA or a farmer's market vendor permit that you might have, or other like wholesale opportunities. So that's kind of the gist of the food self-purchasing program, is just really that kind of supplemental opportunity to sell food to another market that we manage internally. And that's based on some grant funding and some private donor money that enables us to purchase food still for wholesale prices directly from you and then distribute it for free to over 20 local food sale partners throughout the Twin Cities. The third and kind of final market that we offer support around and manage internally is the Kingfield Farmers Market group. And we'll have some more meetings in the future to talk about that. I just received confirmation from their market manager that our vendor application was accepted again for this coming season. So Big River Farms will have a weekly booth at that farmers market in South Minneapolis. And if you're interested, let's follow up after this meeting to talk about what that looks like. But again, we'll have some meetings to talk through that specific market and what that group is going to look like. But it's just another way for you to gain some experience from that perspective of selling at a farmer's market without having to apply independently and without having to go set up at a booth or a stall at a farmer's market for 5 months every weekend. So you can participate in that group as a Big River Farms farmer and sign up for a handful of weekends. I think it's on Sundays every week for about 5 months from May through October too, or maybe I think May through October, maybe 6 months. But stay tuned for more details about that. Okay, so those are kind of the main 3 markets. Like I said, we'll primarily be focusing on CSA and the food self program tonight. And again, the process for just how to harvest and turn in your produce, how to record everything. We'll touch a little bit on invoicing and purchase orders, and labeling harvest totes. So yeah, let's dive into it. We'll share all these documents again too after this class, so you have copies of them for reference. And let us know if you want printed copies. We can print them out at the farm office and give them to you directly, or put them in your mailboxes in the entryway too, so that you have paper copies for your records. So it kind of all starts with just telling us what produce you might have on a weekly basis, thinking about a week in advance. So, for example, CSA, May and I will do a weekly field walk on Tuesdays, usually Tuesday mornings, and do a harvest estimate, walking through all 50 acres and speaking to you all if you're there, or just kind of eyeing what's in your field and what might be ready to harvest the following week. So something to keep in mind is that this is kind of a process that starts a week in advance to help plan everything out and to figure out what's ready to harvest and what's going to what market or what sales outlet. So like I said, May and I will do that kind of weekly field walk and harvest estimate process on Tuesdays. And if you have contracts with us for CSA, one of the new requirements this year is participating in a few of those harvest estimates to really learn what that process looks like and how to gauge visually what might be ready to harvest the following week, just based on how well it's growing. So we'll do that, and that'll help inform our CSA purchases. But also, if you're able to, you can use a harvest estimate sheet, which we can print and provide copies of, and use that to tell us as staff what you have available for various markets. So I have an example of that I can share real quick. It's kind of a basic template that, let's see, so that gets the screen. I think I'm clear on the right document now. So basically it has, a space for your name and the date. There's just a note on there that this is a process that happens about a week in advance. And then spaces to list the crop type or the produce item, the veggie or fruit that you're growing, the unit that it would be harvested in. So, either pounds or bunches or each, or, it might be pint. So listing that unit type, the total amount you might have available. So for example, it could be like, say the crop type is cabbage, the unit would be each or heads, and then the total amount available, say you have like 100 heads that would be ready to harvest for the following week. The next category on the top there is just identifying which market it's going to. So typically it'll probably be CSA or LFET, which is that acronym for the food shelf program, local food for every table. We haven't had too much of this in the past, but there is an opportunity to provide food for donations too if you don't have an available market, but I think it's pretty minimal. But just in case, there's a category and a column for listing that as well. We worked with a partner in Stillwater, not too far from the farm, connected to a church and a senior living home that accepted a lot of food donations from us last year, but they had a kitchen program that closed down. So I think we're still in the process of figuring out what some of those partnerships, those community partnerships might look like for food donations this coming season. So stay tuned on that. All right, let's switch back to that other document. Okay, so that's the harvest estimate process. And if you can turn in those weekly harvest estimate sheets to us by noon on Tuesday, that would be great to help guide purchases for CSA and the food shelf program the following week, following Monday and Tuesday. The next kind of step in that process is looking for a purchase order from us, from staff at Big River Farms or at the food group. Like I said, May and I do that weekly field walk on Tuesdays to kind of gauge what's ready to harvest the following week for CSA. And then by that Thursday of the same week, I'll create purchase orders, which is basically a piece of paper that lists your name and contact information, and then the types and quantities of produce that we want to purchase from you for the following week's CSA boxes. So you should get those in your mailbox by Thursday each week if we're purchasing from you. And like I've said before, we really prioritize what's in the CSA contracts that we've created with you over the winter. But there's definitely flexibility. So if certain items on contracts aren't available because of pests or weather damage, or if they're just not ready to harvest yet, there's some flexibility there. So we might ask to purchase other produce items that you aren't on contract for, and confirm if you don't have another market outlet for them, and could potentially purchase those from you too for CSA. So keep an eye out on Thursdays, or if you're not at the farm, maybe the following day, Friday or Saturday, for those CSA purchase orders. I'll print out paper copies and put them in your mailboxes in the entryway at the farm office, and then I'll also email digital copies to you as well if you prefer getting things digitally instead of in hard copy form. The process for the food shelf program for the local food for every table supplemental market is kind of the onus is more on you as a farmer to make weekly offers of what you have to Primrose, who is our sourcing coordinator at the food group and who is managing that program and those produce offers on a weekly basis. So she's asked that those be emailed to her, or you can call her on the phone by, I think it's by noon on Monday each week. And then she'll tell you what the food group is able to buy based on some of the food shelf partner needs. So ideally by Monday afternoon, you should know what type of produce has been accepted for that food shelf program. We're still figuring out what the pickup day will be for that. Somebody from the food group who is an existing staff member and a delivery driver is going to come out to Big River Farms once a week to pick up all of those food shelf harvests that you turn in to the cooler, and then we'll bring them back to our food bank in New Hope, just northwest of Minneapolis, so that they can be repacked and distributed to food shelf partners. So again, stay tuned for what day those deliveries might be, which will inform what days you might want to harvest that produce. For folks who were in our program and were farming at Big River last year, you might remember that we did 2 weekly pickups and 2 weekly harvest days for this program, which used to be called Farm to Food Bank. So that's one difference this year if you participated in that last year. This year it'll just be 1 weekly harvest day and pickup for those food shelf deliveries. The next kind of step in this process is harvesting the produce for the two markets, or for the various sales outlets. So Big River Farms, we have our CSA packing every Wednesday morning from 6 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. And it's kind of best practice to harvest, as close to the packing and delivery days for various markets as possible. So ideally, you can harvest produce for CSA if you get a purchase order for it on either a Monday or a Tuesday, and turn it into us so that it's ready for packing into CSA boxes at 6 a.m. on Wednesday mornings. Like I said, we're still figuring out what day the pickups for the food shelf program will be. So stay tuned, TBD, for when to harvest for the local food for every table program or market. And if you're a part of that Kingfield Farmers Market group, the farmers markets are on Sundays. So kind of best practice there is, again, to harvest a day or two before on Friday or Saturday. We will be renting space again at the Good Acre, which is a warehouse space with cooler storage and dry pallet storage, and a bunch of facilities, a commercial kitchen and some other spaces in St. Paul, kind of right near the state fairgrounds. So that'll be an option too that we can talk more about when we dive into the Kingfield Farmers Market training in April. But just to give you a heads up on that you can harvest, a day or two early, and then you'll be responsible for doing the deliveries of produce and the sales at the farmers market if you take part in that group. But you can store it closer to the city at the Good Acre, so you don't have to drive all the way back to the farm if you live in Minneapolis or St. Paul, or one of those surrounding suburbs. So stay tuned for more details on that as well. But typically Friday and Saturday are the best days to harvest produce for the farmers market. The next step on the process is weighing and tailing your produce. So there's harvest logs. We'll create and print out harvest logs for each of you and put them in additional mailboxes, or they're kind of like little square cubby spaces attached to the wall in the pack bed just outside of the main cooler. And each of you will have a folder with some harvest logs, some pack bed cleaning logs, and some tote cleaning logs, a few other resources out there. So look out for those. We haven't created them yet, but they will be created soon and put out there as the growing season kicks into high gear. And it's important to keep track of anything that you harvest from the field for a few reasons, because we need to track everything that's harvested regardless of what market it goes to, whether it's for a big river farms or a food group market, or if it's for donation or one of your independent markets. Again, if you have your own CSA program or your own farmers market vendor permit or your own wholesale accounts or other opportunities that you're selling to. So that, again, that's for our organic certification records, that needs to be done. So just a heads up there. But also it's good to keep those records for your own use for future planting seasons, to know what you planted, what you harvested, and how to plan for future crop planting and future market sales as you're growing your business in future years. Next, you'll want to wash and pack your produce according to the kind of standard post-harvesting standards. I think we still have some of the physical books that list those standards for each crop, but if not, we can get some more. We can also email out digital copies of those that have photos that show like the best practices for bunching radishes or the best size for cucumbers and cabbage. It's got a whole lot of different produce standards in it. So yeah, washing and packing produce in the pack bed according to those post-harvest standards, and then whatever's on your purchase order. So Primrose will give you a purchase order for the food sales programs, and I'll be giving you a purchase order for anything we buy from you for our CSA. So make sure that you're harvesting and washing and packaging whatever on those purchase orders, and not anything additional because we won't be able to pay you for it. So just a heads up there to kind of double check those purchase orders and to not, put in a bunch of extra time and energy that might not be needed, especially if you're not going to get paid for it. Labeling is important because we have many different markets that folks are selling to. So make sure that when you're turning in a harvest tote to the coolers, that you put a label on the side using duct tape. I don't have an example tonight, but we'll create one and post it in the pack bed that kind of shows the color coding model for labels. And you're probably familiar with this if you farmed with us last year, but for new folks, the idea is, say you're turning in a big harvest tote with a produce item in it for CSA. You'll want to find the correct colored duct tape. I think in the past, I'm going to mess this up. I have another document that lays it out, but it's either orange or blue or white duct tape. And then you write CSA on it, your name, the market that it's going to, and a couple other details. But I can get into the label specifics later on tonight. I have another document that lays that out. But just important to note that you should be putting a label on the side of anything that's turned in so that we can identify quickly what market it's going to. Cooler space. We have two main coolers. There's a big one, a big walk-in cooler inside the pack bed space. And then there's another cooler closer to kind of the entry of the farm, next to some of the tool sheds and the machine shop in a building called the Granary Building. And because this year we have the most farmers I think that we've had in a long time, we've got close to 20 farm teams that are farming at Big River this season. So we're in talks with staff too about opportunities to expand some of our cooler space and what that might look like. So stay tuned for that. But just as a general rule of thumb, you all will have designated storage spaces in a cooler at the farm. with a wooden sipping pallet or a plastic sipping pallet on the floor to make sure any harvest totes are raised up off the floor for food safety requirements, and it'll have your name above it. So anything that you're harvesting for your own independent market, you can turn into those individual pallets within the cooler where your name is listed. For some of these kind of aggregated or cooperative market opportunities like our CSA and the food shelf program, where we as an organization are buying and sourcing food from multiple farmers, from all of you. We have a few pallets on the floor in the main cooler space in the pack shed where you can turn all that produce in for both CSA and for the food shelf purchasing program. So yeah, so keep an eye out on designated pallet space to come. And just a heads up that the center pallets and the main cooler are for turning in CSA and food shelf orders. Two more steps in this process, and then we can switch to talking about some other things. The next piece is really important, writing invoices. We're planning to have a class or a training, I should say, in April with our accountant, Jeannie, and Jeff and I, to go over kind of the accounting process, invoicing, purchase order process, and just what happens behind the scenes with some of that to make sure that you all are getting paid on time for anything that we purchase from you as Big River Farms in the food group. But I just wanted to touch on it briefly tonight. So make sure that you're turning in an invoice with anything that you harvest for CSA or the food shelf program. And this is a slight change from last year, where it wasn't a requirement to turn those in with the harvest, with the produce that you turn into the cooler. But we've discovered from talking to our accountants and from our delivery drivers that it's really important to have those up front, because the delivery driver who comes to pick up that food needs to have total produce types and weight in case they get pulled over when they're driving. And it's also important because we want to make sure we're getting you paid as quickly as possible for any food we purchase from you, and that, you know, things aren't getting lost or falling through the cracks. If you're turning in produce and then, you know, waiting like a week or two to turn in a purchase or to turn in an invoice. We've talked to staff about creating a more secure space in the pack shed, physically next to the cooler, so that when you're turning in produce for either CSA or the food shelf program, you can take that paper invoice that you filled out, and we'll have like some sort of a secure box on the wall that's locked that you can place those in, so that you know, they don't accidentally go missing or are misplaced. And that will allow us as staff to pull those invoices out of there as we're loading up the trucks to these markets for CSA and for the food shelf purchasing program. I should say we're also in the process of hiring a contracted part-time CSA delivery driver. So instead of having a full-time staff member like Pierce last year, who was doing our CSA deliveries, it'll be a part-time delivery driver specifically for that program. And an existing food group member will be coming once a week, like I said, to pick up those food shelf deliveries. But in either case, we need those invoices when the food is turned in to the coolers. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in that upcoming accounting, invoicing, purchase order class or training session in April. Last but not least, recording produce harvest types and quantities. So I talked about this a little bit with harvest records, but for inventory tracking purposes, we have a big whiteboard in the pack bed, kind of right across from the main cooler space. And we'll write all of your names on that and have a space at the top for market type and for date. And each week, when you turn in produce totes to the cooler for either CSA or for food shelf harvest, we ask that you please write down on that whiteboard next to your name the types of produce and the quantities that you've harvested and turned into the cooler. So that's kind of a accountability measure and a tracking measure for us as staff to make note, like if anything is missing. So for example, it helps to have that kind of visual inventory check on Wednesday mornings when we're packing CSA boxes with volunteers in the pack shed, in case, you know, we end up having a produce item we've ordered on a purchase order that's missing. We can kind of go back and cross-reference the physical paper purchase orders, but also that inventory list that you're helping us fill out when you turn in produce on the whiteboard next to the cooler in the pack shed. So let's talk about that more in person at the farm too, if you have additional questions about what that looks like. And then again, just final note, if you're short or missing any produce items that we've purchased or that we've requested on a purchase order, please communicate that with us, with me for CSA, or with Jeff for CSA, or with Primrose for the food shelf program. It's probably not quite as important for the food shelf program, although it's still important, but especially for CSA, if you can let us know by midday on Tuesday, the week of harvest, if you think you'll be missing anything on the purchase order, that really helps us, because then it allows us time to reach out, to follow up with you and see if you have another veggie or fruit that might be able to get harvested as a replacement item. Or we can reach out to other Big River Farms farmers to see if they might have a replacement produce item, because we want to hit that that max or that minimum number of different types of veggies in every CSA box each week, and make sure that we're not cutting numbers who have subscribed to our CSA short of anything, since they've paid up front to get your delicious organic produce. All right, any questions before we move on? You can feel free to put them in the chat and we can circle back at the end if there's more questions, or feel free to unmute yourself too if you want to ask anything. Okay, if not, again, feel free to put stuff in the chat and we can get to it at the end if any questions pop up while I'm talking. But if not, I'm going to jump into another document about how to sell to Big River Farms, with some more details about purchase orders and labeling for the most part. Some of it is a review of what we just talked about. For the most part, there's some more examples in there about what an invoice looks like, and what to include on an invoice, and some additional information about supplies and cleaning and record keeping. So I'm going to dive into that. I will say too, this is all very logistical and kind of dense. So again, if you have questions that pop up either during this meeting or afterwards, feel free to follow up with me over email or phone, or we can meet in person at the farm, hopefully too, as the weather's getting nicer and COVID rates are declining. But yeah, let's keep talking if there's questions. I know we also had 2 hours scheduled for this meeting, but it should go fairly quickly. So we might be done by 7 if we don't have a ton of additional questions either. All right, so continuing to talk about how to sell to Big River Farms. I talked a little bit about the free markets, the CSA program, the new food shelf program, and the Kingfield Farmers Market Group. Just to give you a heads up, our goal this year for CSA is 200 veggie fairs, and we still have 2 external farm partners that we source organic fruit fairs from for our CSA program. Like I said, the local food for every table food shelf program is replacing what used to be Farm to Food Bank. If you haven't had a chance, check out that video recording on our YouTube page if you're interested in participating in that program. And if you have questions, let me know. I can send out some of those FAQ documents and pricing guides and produce preferences from the food shelf partners too, again, if you still need them. And then again, just stay tuned for more Kingfield Farmers Market training opportunities in April. We talked about harvest estimates already, but just a reminder to turn those in to me or just by Tuesday, by noon on Tuesday if you can. Again, for estimating what might be ready to harvest in your field for the following week, so kind of a week in advance. Purchase orders we touched on. This again just kind of lays out that process for receiving purchase orders. For CSA, you should receive them from me by Thursday afternoon, and then you can turn in your produce by the following Tuesday evening for Wednesday packing. The physical piece of paper that the purchase order is printed on will be pink, and the corresponding labels that you put on harvest totes that you turn in will be the same color. That's kind of how that color coding process is laid out. So look for a pink purchase order for CSA, look for a white purchase order for the food shelf program. And when you're turning in those harvest totes to the cooler, use pink duct tape for the CSA labels and white duct tape for the food shelf harvest that you're turning in. We also have some color coding label systems for farmers market produce that's being turned in for Kingfield Farmers Market and for donations. Those are a little different because there's no purchase orders involved. So there's no physical paper order that you might get for those things because they're more self-guided, right? Like you can choose what you want to sell at the farmers market if you're a part of that group, or if you decide that you have excess produce with no market, or maybe it's second quality, it might be a little blemished or bruised, you can always donate it too. So no purchase orders for those two options, but when you're turning those items into the center pallet in the cooler and putting labels on them, you can use blue tape for the farmers market harvest and orange tape for anything that you want to be donated. This is all pretty repetitive. We talked about the pallet space, the labels, cooler space, assigned pallet, the harvest logs, and the whiteboard for inventory tracking. Here's a few more details about turning in produce and what that looks like. So we have shared plastic reusable harvest totes that you'll all have access to. And when you turn in produce for any market, you'll need to put a plastic liner or like a big plastic bag inside that harvest tote before you fill it up with cleaned, washed produce, or if it's bunched or however it's packaged according to those harvest standards. So when you're out in the field harvesting, you don't need those plastic liners, but once you harvest and clean and wash everything, put one of those bags into a separate clean harvest tote, and then put all your clean washed produce into those totes. Only use one harvest tote per veggie item. So, it'll all be beets in one tote, or in one of those harvest totes, one of those plastic boxes, or carrots, or, cabbage, whatever the produce item is. But just using one tote per produce type. And again, for CSA, labeling it with pink tape. On that piece of tape, label it with the market. So you can just write CSA with a marker on that piece of tape. The type of produce it is. So say it's broccoli, right? CSA on the tape, broccoli, maybe it's 150 heads. So write the quantity on there. This year, we're not doing custom CSA shares. And so when we pack boxes on Wednesday mornings, we'll need to know what produce item is for what size share. So we have two sizes, full and half. So on the label, on that duct tape label that you put on the side of the harvest tote, be sure to also write whether it's for full or for half shares. Just write full or half on the tape. And new this year, if you participated in CSA last year, I'll also be writing that information on the purchase order you received. So it might say, CSA purchase order, broccoli, 100 heads, full share. So keep an eye out for that on your purchase orders, whether it's being purchased for the full or half, and then be sure to write that on the label when you turn in your produce totes to the cooler as well. And that's last but not least, your name as well. I don't know how applicable this will be, but it's always good to go over this because it's part of our food tracking, food safety and organic certification standards. If you have external wholesale partners that you're selling to, whether it's a restaurant, a grocery store, a hospital, a school, be sure to use a wholesale label on your harvest tote when you're turning in that produce to the coolers. And that's mainly, again, to help us track in case there's potential like contamination or a foodborne disease outbreak. If somebody gets sick eating any of the food that we're harvesting and selling and distributing to different markets, we might be contacted by the state to kind of backtrack and figure out where that produce came from and maybe where the contamination started. So that's really the reasoning behind having these wholesale labels. So we'll print out a bunch of these and have them available at the farm for your use if you have wholesale accounts. And this is just an example of what that wholesale label looks like. So it lists the lot number, which is it starts with your plot number at Big River Farms. So in this case, G is the plot number. It also lists the month, the day, and the year. I guess C2 is the plot number. And then the date on here is July 21st of 2019 as an example. So fill out that lot number, the initials of who harvested and packed the produce. So you can see here, the initials are EW for the farmer. The crop type and amount. So this example shows carrots, 24 bunches, and then who the buyer is or who you're selling to wholesale. So in this case, it's listed as Shared Ground Farmers Co-op as the buyer. Local food for every table, the food shelf purchasing program, very similar. Again, using one clean harvest tote, putting a plastic liner bag into it, using one plastic harvest tote per produce item, and labeling it with white tape, white duct tape, again, to match the purchase order color. And similar to CSA on that type, write the market. So you can just abbreviate it as LFET, the produce item and the quantity, and then your name as well. And again, both food shelf purchase or food shelf program harvest that we purchase from you and CSA produce that we purchase from you can all be put on those center pallets in the main cooler by the pack shed, with the note that there might be additional storage space this season because of the additional farmers that we have. Donations, same kind of thing. Harvest tote, plastic liner, label it with orange tape and write donation on that piece of tape, produce type and quantity, and your name. Just a reminder that invoices are required with anything when you turn it in. If for some reason we receive produce from you and we can't find an invoice, we'll still use it for CSA because it's already been paid for by members, but it might mean that we reach back out to you just to make sure that we get that invoice when you turn something in, and it might mean that we might not buy from you the following week, just as we kind of tweak that process and make sure that we're all on the same page. We've been told from our accountants and our delivery driver at the food group that when they send the driver on a weekly basis to pick up the food shelf produce, if they don't have an invoice from you, they won't be able to take the produce onto the delivery vehicle to bring to food shelf partners, which means that even though you've spent all that time harvesting and walking and packing that produce and turning it in, you won't be able to get paid for it that week unless we have a purchase order from, or I'm sorry, unless we have an invoice from you too. Here's an example invoice. We have invoice books with paper copies of these kind of forms, of these templates that you can buy from our farm store at the farm. And be sure to always put your name on it and who you're selling to or what market it's going to. So this is a wholesale example of what an invoice looks like. But so for CSA, you might just write CSA at the top of it. For the food shelf program, you can just abbreviate and write LFET or food shelf. always make sure to put in the purchase order number. So on this invoice, it says customer order number, and that's where you can write that purchase order number to help cross-reference what this invoice is for, what purchase that this is related to. So any purchase order you receive for either CSA or for the food sales program will have a purchase order number associated with it. So just be sure to make sure that that's written on your invoice as well. And then the date, make sure to put the date on there for the delivery day, not the date that it's harvested, but the day that the food will be delivered to various markets. So for example, if you harvest produce on a Tuesday for the Big River Farm CSA, you would put the date of Wednesday the next day when it's being packed and delivered. Same thing for the food sales program. Say the delivery day ends up being on Friday each week, and you harvest on Thursdays. When you're filling out the invoice, make sure to put that Friday delivery date on the invoice. The rest of it's pretty self-explanatory, just listing all of the produce items, the amount that was ordered. So you can see at the top here, there's carrots listed. 1 case was ordered. And then in the skip column, that's where you can note any changes that might have happened, like we talked about, right, because of pest or weather, or maybe it's just not ready to harvest yet. So in this case, a case of carrots was ordered and a case of carrots was harvested and cleaned and shipped. An example here of what that might look like if it's different from the purchase order is the tomatoes at the bottom. So for this wholesale order, 30 pounds of tomatoes were ordered from the purchase order, but only 20 pounds were available for harvest and delivery. So that's kind of how you can note on the invoice any differences between what was purchased from you on the purchase order, whether it was for CSA or the food sales program, and what the actual total was based on what you had available to harvest. Then make sure to just list the prices paid for each produce item. We have a master food hub price list at Big River Farms that you can use for both CSA and for the food sales purchases. We can print out copies of those so that you have them for your records, but we'll also post a copy in the pack bed too, so that when you're cleaning and turning in produce and putting it in the cooler, it'll be there as a reference just right on the wall outside of the cooler in the pack bed. Make sure to list the unit number. In this example, since it's wholesale, it's all in cases except for the tomatoes. So you can see the corresponding unit numbers. For carrots, it's 1 for 1 case. Same with beets. For cabbage, they ordered 3 cases, so the unit is 3. And then for tomatoes, it's pounds, so the unit is a pound sign. And then be sure to tally everything up. So, multiply the individual price by the case price or by the unit price, the unit amount, and then tally it up all at the bottom. So in this example, you can see the total price is $247 being paid for what was purchased. Just a note for CSA, because those items are typically purchased by the unit and not by the case, you might get a purchase order for something in pounds because it's easier to harvest and weigh on your side as a farmer. So make sure to weigh everything after you harvest and clean it before you turn it in. And on your harvest records and invoice, include both the individual counts and the pounds. So for example, if it's beets, the standard harvest procedure for beets, I think, is like 5 to 7 per bunch. So you'll want to weigh the total amount of beets. I'm sorry, I'm thinking of radishes. The total amount of radishes that you've harvested in pounds for your records. But then also for CSA, you might say, I have 100 bunches of radishes this week. So just a heads up on that. There might be some discrepancy there in what's on the purchase order and then what you list on your invoice. So feel free to reach out to me or May or Jess if you have questions about that. Supplies. I mentioned before we have a farm store. We're in the process of consolidating some of those materials because in the past they've been in a few different outbuildings at the farm. So we're trying to have them all in one central location this year. And these are just some examples of items that are available for you to purchase from us in that farm store specifically for packaging produce for various markets. So there's things like wholesale boxes, twist ties and rubber bands, pint containers, those plastic liner bags for the harvest totes. We've had some harvest knives in the past, so those might be available again. Cardboard boxes, bushel boxes, and wax paper. There's also additional items like I know Jess has been working on doing some inventory for greenhouse supplies so that they're ready to purchase this weekend when we do our greenhouse orientation. And there's also things like drip tape and things that you can use out in the field too. So I'm sure there'll be some additional updates and training on the farm store as we get closer to the season, but just wanted to give you a heads up from a produce purchasing and harvesting perspective that there's some supplies there that you can purchase from us for your use. We will provide those wholesale labels I mentioned before and the colored duct tape for writing labels on harvest totes. So those are materials that you don't have to purchase that we'll provide for free to you.
Matt, can I ask a quick question? This is Heather.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, awesome. Just wondering, can we turn in produce in wax boxes with liners and do things that way? Is that also allowed? Let's say if there was like a shortage on bins or something of that sort, or you only want them in the other bins?
Yeah, no, that's totally doable. If you have your own wax cardboard boxes that you want to use, like that's a great point. Like if for some reason we're short, you can definitely do that too for CSA or for the food shelf program, because those items are getting repackaged anyways once they get to the New Hope warehouse before they go out to the food shelf partners. So yeah, that's a good question.
Perfect. And then for invoices, so we technically need 3 invoices per order. So we need one for us and our records, one for Big River Farms, and then one for the driver if they're doing the deliveries. Is that right?
It probably will only be 2, one for your records and one for us / the driver. Like,
because they can share. You guys can share that one.
We'll basically be giving it to them. So like for CSA, we'll just keep them at the farm. We don't have to give them to the CSA delivery driver. We'll just kind of give him a heads up on total quantities that we've purchased. But for the food shelf program, we'll just kind of do that double check with whoever the driver is that comes, and then we'll give those copies to the driver. So yeah, so we only need 2 copies of any invoice.
Okay, perfect. That's great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. Any other questions?
I have a question for Heather.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Is there an advantage of using the wax boxes?
For us, some of our stuff, I think we just know how much fits in a box really easily, and it's just a good system for us. But there is times when there's shortages on boxes too, so it's just handy to know what the backup option is if we did run out of bins or totes to put stuff in when things get real busy and there's a ton of produce coming out of the field. So those are kind of our main reasons. But when we sell to other wholesalers, we have other contracts. We already do our boxes. So if we're out there doing our usual system, we may just stick to our usual system. Just for
Got it.
Yeah, hopefully that answers
Thank you.
your question. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks, Veda, and thanks, Heather, for asking a question and answering a question. I will say too that we've been in talks on the staff side about finding some money to purchase additional reusable harvest totes for the field and for turning in produce. So stay tuned on updates on that as well. But that's a good point, is that in the peak growing season and harvest season, when there's tons of produce coming out of the field, it can be difficult to have enough totes. So again, stay tuned for the potential for having more of those this year and what that's going to look like. That's a good segue into harvest totes, the next thing on here. Like we've talked about a few times, we have those harvest totes that you can use. There'll be a certain number assigned to each farm team based on how many acres you have access to at the farm. So, if you have 2 acres, you might have access to more harvest totes than somebody who's just starting out and has a quarter of an acre. So we'll kind of let you know what that looks like as we get closer to the season, and as we figure out if we're able to purchase more harvest totes this season too. As a farmer, you're responsible for cleaning any harvest totes that you use each week for any market, for CSA, for your own wholesale accounts, for the food sales program, or for the farmers markets. And kind of tying into what Heather just mentioned with the wax cardboard boxes, you're encouraged to buy your own boxes for harvest totes as well if you need more than what we're able to provide using our limited resources as Big River Farms in the food group. So like I said, we will have some wholesale boxes and cardboard wax boxes available for purchase from the farm store. But if you have questions about where to purchase those outside of Big River Farms, we have resources we can provide you with too. So I think May and Pierce probably have a lot of knowledge about that if you want to ask one of them, or come to the office too when we're there. We have catalogs and resources we can share with you about where to purchase those items outside of the farm too. Of note here, we have a couple different colors of harvest totes. And that's to help with having specific ones for harvesting in the field, and then separate ones for using those liners and turning in the produce once it's washed and after it's harvested and washed. So in the past, we used the large brown totes, and we had some black totes for harvesting in the field, and then some larger green and gray plastic totes for turning in that clean produce in the cooler and not using in the field. And from a food safety perspective, just a note on not using the harvest totes for anything except for produce.
Hey Matt, I just want to jump in real quick.
Sure.
So for the harvest tote section, I think that what you just mentioned is different than what we did right in the participation agreement this season. I think it said, according to the participation agreement, it did say that we were gonna like rent out totes this season. So that might be something we want to check in on if we're changing that.
Okay, good call. Thanks, Pierce. Appreciate the insight and the update. Yeah, I do remember we had something in the participation agreement about shared resources and having a switch this year for what that looks like. So let's follow up on that as staff. Sorry for the confusion, everybody, but we'll follow up on that with Kazuo and some other farm staff and get back to you and let you know what that looks like. Records, harvest records. We talked about harvest records a bit. So just a reminder to record anything that's harvested in the field for any market for our certification and our food safety plans. Please leave those harvest records in the mailbox cubbies in the pack bed, because we'll go out there and kind of cross-reference them throughout the season just to make sure that things are being recorded. A few reminders: check in with us if you have any questions ever about anything, whether it's market related, you can talk to me about it. If it is harvest related or crop planning related, you can talk to May or Becca. If it's your first time harvesting a crop, let us know if you have questions about how to harvest something or what those post-harvest handling standards look like. And May's a great resource for that as well. If you want to talk to her in the field or at the farm office or on the phone, that's always an option too. And last but not least, pack bed and tote cleaning. So like I mentioned before, every farm team will be assigned to cleaning the pack bed at least 2 times throughout the season. And we'll put up a calendar in the pack bed with you all assigned to specific dates throughout the season. Let us know once that's posted if there's days that you can't make, or throughout the season if you see that it's your week coming up to clean the pack bed, let us know if you're not able to do it like a week in advance, and we can figure out another farmer or staff to fill in. All that being said, we were just talking today as staff at a meeting about potentially changing up some of what the pack bed cleaning and tote cleaning processes look like to make it a little bit more collective and to make it more efficient and make sure that, you know, there's not one individual or one small team tasked with doing a whole bunch of cleaning on one week without support from other farmers and other staff members. So we want to make sure it's as collaborative and efficient as possible so that no one's spending a ton of time cleaning the pack bed or cleaning totes. Same as in years past, every farm team is responsible for washing and sanitizing your assigned harvest tote on a weekly basis because of our food safety plan. We'll have some cleaning logs and cleaning stations set up in the pack bed for that to happen. Staff will be responsible for doing a deep clean of the pack bed and the totes at both the beginning and the end of the season to just make sure everything is ready to go and that it's all clean before we put it back into storage at the end of the year. One final change update different from CSA last year is instead of having one farm staff be responsible for sanitizing and cleaning the CSA totes on a weekly basis, it's shifting to more of a collective responsibility, partially due to limited capacity and resources on our side and partially because of feedback we received from farmers last year who participated in CSA and wanted more opportunities to kind of learn the behind the scenes ropes of CSA program management, from harvest walks and field estimates to packing CSAs in the morning, the deliveries to cleaning some shared resources. So we're still talking through what this will look like and how to make it, you know, as equitable as possible so that, again, it's not all being done by one person or one team and taking a ton of time each week, but how we can all really collectively manage and clean these shared resources that we have and make sure that staff and farmers are participating in that process every week. So we've been talking about hiring that CSA delivery driver on contract, and there's the potential for us to add some more hours to that job description so that that person could be kind of the main staff point person that's both managing and helping with cleaning CSA totes on a weekly basis. So nothing concrete has been decided there yet, and we still need to finalize that job description and hire for it. But just to give you a heads up that that might be part of the tote cleaning process for CSA totes, so the reusable boxes that we physically pack produce in to deliver CSA boxes each week. One final note on that is the CSA totes just need to be sanitized every week. They don't get super dirty. We use plastic liners in those CSA delivery totes the past 2 years as a COVID precaution, but have decided that it's not necessary this year as we've learned more about how COVID is transmitted. And, you know, it plays into our environmental values as an organization to try and reduce the amount of plastic we're using. So we still need to use the plastic liners in the harvest totes from a food safety perspective because there's holes in those totes and there's more potential for things like soil and pest contamination to get inside if there's not a plastic liner. But for the CSA totes, we won't be using plastic liners and we'll just need to be sanitizing those on a weekly basis and making sure that they're clean before 6 a.m. each Wednesday when the packing and deliveries happen. So stay tuned for more logistics and details about what CSA tote cleaning will look like this year. And that is all I have to share. I want to open it back up for any additional questions you might have about that whole process, the weekly process of doing harvest estimates, of doing record keeping, of turning in produce. Any questions that you have, I'm happy to answer. And I'm sure some other staff on the line would be happy to jump in and answer too. Otherwise, we can end a little bit early. I don't think we had any other questions in the chat that popped up. I saw Heather's question about the invoices. But yeah, otherwise, thanks everybody for coming. I appreciate you being here. Again, reach out to me if you have market specific questions, or reach out to May if you have questions about harvesting or anything related to crops. And hopefully I'll see you in person soon. I'll be at the farm this Saturday for the greenhouse orientation if you're there. Otherwise, hopefully we'll cross paths at the greenhouse or at the farm in the next few weeks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Have a
Thank
good night.
you. Gracias. Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Gracias,
you,
Mario.
Matt.
Bye,
Bye,
Thank you,
everybody.
Matt.
everyone.
See ya.
Bye, friends.
Bye.
Yeah.